The story begins with Duke Ike's furiously accusing Nevia of poisoning his daughter, Vivian. He reminds Nevia that despite being an orphan, he provided her with a lavish education. Nevia maintains a calm facade, but inside, she feels a deep sorrow. She denies poisoning Vivian and reflects on her life. Taken from a destitute orphanage, she was given a false identity and raised as the Duke's adopted daughter, meant to replace the terminally ill Vivian as the prince's fiancée. She realizes everything she has is a lie, including her family and status. Deep down, all she ever wanted was a real family and warmth. A maid rushes in, announcing Vivian's recovery, interrupting the tense moment. Upon hearing the news, the Duke immediately goes to see his daughter. After learning of Vivian's recovery, Duke Agnes brutally beats Nevia, accusing her of poisoning the tea she gave Vivian. He roars that everything she possesses belongs to his family and questions a commoner like her having the audacity to become queen. He also reveals that her engagement has long been broken. Covered in wounds and bleeding, Nevia insists she has no reason to poison Vivian now. However, the Duke flies into a rage, beating her again, accusing her of being jealous that Vivian is now Prince Eris's fiancée. Nevia contemplates the truth. Vivian herself asked her to deliver the tea. She couldn't have known it was poisoned. Even as a child, she wouldn't make such a foolish mistake. No one considers she might be framed, proving they never truly cared for her. She retorts that if she truly wanted revenge, she wouldn't use such an obvious method. Enraged, Duke Agnes draws his sword and presses it against Nevia's neck, declaring that harming the prince's fiancée is tantamount to attempting regicide. At that moment, Wood appears, informing the Duke of Prince Eris's arrival. The Duke orders him to bring the prince in, but Wood insists on handling the matter himself. The Duke scoffs and, before leaving, calls Nevia a disgrace to the royal family. Wood then looks at the bruised and bloodied Nevia, mockingly saying she looks fine. However, Nevia calmly states she knows he poisoned the tea, and if Vivian had actually drunk it, she would be dead. Wood shrugs, admitting it, and sarcastically remarks on her luck in escaping death. He makes no attempt to hide his deep hatred for her, calling her a lowly commoner unworthy of her noble status. Then, he reveals another shocking truth. The true mastermind behind all this is someone else, the Queen. He questions Nevia's audacity in seducing Prince Eris and angering Her Majesty. Wood sneers, tossing a vial of poison at Nevia, mockingly telling her to drink it. He reminds her that her days as a princess are over and asks her why she thinks Prince Eris has come. Without hesitation, Nevia picks up the poison, accepts her fate, and drinks it all. Wood scoffs in disgust. He accuses her of acting noble, even in death. Soon, Nevia begins to cough up blood, but she isn't despairing. Instead, she smiles at Wood. She reflects on all the suffering she has endured. She tried so hard, only to be accepted by this family, but even after giving everything. Then, she reveals a startling secret. She has returned to the past 7 times. Wood recoils in disbelief. Nevia calmly continues, stating this is her last chance at rebirth. She once believed they could be a real family, but she's done playing the part. She coldly tells Wood she won't live for them anymore and bids him farewell, ready to break free from her tragic fate. As Nevia's life fades, the countdown on her wrist, representing the number of regressions, reaches 0, meaning she only has one last chance. She dies, then wakes up again as a 1-year-old. Lying in bed, the young Nevia processes the fact that she has returned once more. She wonders how long she'll live this time. Her regressions began when she was 20, her first death being a carriage accident. Afterward, she always returned to the same point, the anniversary of her adoption into the Agnes family. She wonders if magic is involved, but dismisses the idea, as regression magic doesn't exist. Looking at her wrist, she finds the numbers gone, confirming this is her final life. Reflecting on her past failures, she wonders where she went wrong. Was it because she passively lived her 8th life? Or was it her desperate desire for acceptance? Or perhaps simply her desire for a real family? She even wonders if the problem, from the very beginning, was her birth. She realizes her biggest mistake was greed, wanting to be like Wood and Vivian, to rely on her parents, to be loved like a normal child. If only she had done better, even just a little. Overwhelmed by sadness and exhaustion, Nevia began to cry, her sobs echoing in the silent room. Reflecting on her past lives, she realized how foolish she had been, dedicating her entire 8th life to the Agnes family, only to be met with the same indifference and scorn. Sobbing, she admitted to herself that she was tired. She had lived too many times, and now she just wanted it all to end. Deep down, she yearned for someone to save her. She dreamt that if her birth parents suddenly appeared and took her away, she wouldn't resist, wouldn't resent them. She just wanted an escape. After crying for a long time, she hiccuped, feeling emotionally drained. Just as she began to calm down, a sinister laugh came from outside the door. She recognized the voice instantly, a chill running down her spine. It was Wood. Nevia recalled past hardships, locked in her room as a cruel prank, hunger a constant companion. Her most tragic death occurred in her 4th life, falling from the balcony and dying instantly while rushing to class. Though she'd once miraculously survived the fall, it hadn't changed her fate. A flashback showed a young Wood mocking her, sneering at her bloodied and injured form, calling her a fool. Young Nevia asked him why he hated her so much. Wood's answer was cruel and clear. He despised her low birth, accusing her of degrading his family status. Nevia remembered Wood always hating her, but after being humiliated in front of Princess Lucia, whom he had a one-sided love for, simply because of Nevia's origins, his hatred became venomous. She turned towards the door, wondering if he had left, as she expected. The door was locked again. She sighed, acknowledging Wood's cunning. It was absurd that he would specifically come down from the 2nd floor at dawn, just to torment her. Nevia searched the door for a small hole, remembering what had once made one to put bugs in her room to torment her. Finding the hole, she sighed at the Agnes family's senseless cruelty. Then she grabbed a chair, trying to reach the container of spare lamp oil stored on top of the wardrobe. Stretching, she struggled and with some effort, finally managed to grab it. With a determined expression, she took the oil can to the small hole in the door. She smirked, thinking that since it had gone through so much trouble to make that hole, she might as well put it to good use. She carefully tilted the oil can, making the spill look natural. If anyone saw it, it would appear to be a complete accident. Nevia looked at the candle and threw it onto the oil, the flames igniting instantly. However, she quickly realized the fire was too small. Determined to burn everything, even if it meant being consumed by the flames herself, she looked around for anything that could fuel the fire. Her gaze landed on the books, the history books she had diligently studied, the etiquette books she had used to prepare to become the queen, and the liberal arts books meant for noble young ladies. These books were meant to mold her into the perfect Agnes princess. Without hesitation, she ripped them apart and threw them into the fire, the flames growing larger. As the fire spread, she acknowledged that the so-called perfect princess was dead. Since no savior would suddenly appear to rescue her, she decided that the only person who could protect her now was herself. As the inferno consumed the room, Nevia quickly ran to the balcony, smirking in triumph, thinking that Wood would now have to pay for crossing her. Standing on the balcony, she cried out for help, feigning distress. The servants quickly noticed the fire, screaming in alarm, alerting everyone that Lady Nevia's room on the 2nd floor was ablaze. They rushed towards her room, desperately trying to extinguish the flames, yelling for more water. Seeing them, Nevia put on a helpless act, coughing weakly and pleading for assistance. Wood arrived quickly, startled by the sight of the flames. He frantically tried to rush inside, but was held back by the servants. He protested, yelling that it was his playroom and demanding they put out the fire immediately. As frustration took over, he angrily yelled at the servants to hurry up. When a maid hesitantly warned that the fire was too big, Wood lost his patience and shoved her aside, his irritation growing as the fire continued to rage out of control. Wood angrily pushed past the servants, shouting that he would extinguish the fire with magic himself. But before he could act, the Duke arrived, his voice cutting through the chaos, demanding an explanation. A maid nervously stammered, addressing him as master. But the Duke clicked his tongue impatiently, scolding them for their mismanagement. Annoyed, he swiftly used water magic to extinguish the flames. With the fire extinguished, Nevia continued her act, coughing weakly as if severely affected. The Duke glanced at her with displeasure, thinking that she was nothing more than a precious jewel he had purchased at a great price, and any mishap would be troublesome. The servants frantically cleaned up the mess while Nevia continued her act of frail vulnerability. Seeing her like this, the Duke ordered them to summon Hans, the physician. Meanwhile, Wood's nanny, Philippa, rushed to his side, anxiously checking him for injuries and fussing over him. Witnessing this, the Duke suddenly wondered why Wood was even there. He knew his son well, would loathe Nevia, and would never risk his life to save her. So what was his motive? As the investigation continued, a servant suddenly spoke up, informing the Duke of a strange hole in the door. Puzzled, the Duke examined it closely and quickly deduced that someone had deliberately made the hole, poured oil through it, and set the room ablaze. Hearing this, Philippa, Wood's nanny, began to sweat nervously, fully aware that Wood himself had made that hole. Meanwhile, the Duke speculated whether it was the work of a branch family, perhaps trying to secure a place for their daughter in the main household. However, he dismissed the thought, deeming their methods too clumsy for such an act. Instead, the whole thing felt like a childish prank. Turning to Philippa, the Duke demanded an explanation. Noticing her hesitation, and before she could speak, Wood arrogantly admitted to making the hole, dismissing it as inconsequential. But before he could say more, Nevia stepped forward, feigning tears, and stammered, "Brother, why wouldn't you open the door when I begged you to?" A collective gasp rippled through the servants as they realized the horrifying truth. Wood was the culprit who had trapped Nevia in the burning room. Shock and disbelief spread amongst them. The Duke, burning with rage, glared at Wood, then suddenly roared his name in fury. He slapped Wood hard across the face. The Duke sternly reprimanded him, demanding to know what he was thinking, putting his own sister in such danger. Wood, stunned, stammered, trying to respond. However, the Duke was already beyond furious, consumed by frustration. He knew many factions were waiting for a chance to seize upon any weakness of the Agnes family. He couldn't afford any unnecessary scandals, especially with powerful factions like the Queen's family and the Lucian Duchy watching them closely. The Lucian Duchy's primary business revolved around magic train fuel, and they had long coveted the Agnes family's valuable magic stone mines. Meanwhile, the Queen, to secure a stable supply of magic stones at a reasonable price, had agreed to ensure a daughter of the Agnes family would become the next empress. The Duke internally weighed the risk of Nevia receiving unwanted attention. If rumors spread that Duke Agnes abused his adopted daughter, or worse, that Nevia was a commoner, it could cause problems. He knew those who knew the truth would either be silenced or dealt with, so he had to be cautious. He berated Wood in frustration, accusing him not only of locking Nevia in the room, but also of setting the fire and endangering the entire mansion. Wood hastily denied it, insisting he only locked her in and never started the fire. However, seeing the Duke defend Nevia, he became frustrated, unable to understand why his father was taking her side. To prove his innocence, Wood angrily turned to Nevia, demanding she tell the truth. But as he looked at her, his confidence wavered. Unlike before, when she would tremble in fear, she now stared back at him calmly, her expression firm and confident. Wood felt an unfamiliar pressure, unbearable, and flew into a rage. He began to beat Nevia, calling her a lowly commoner. Nevia continued her act, crying and begging for mercy, feigning weakness. Seeing her like this, Wood felt satisfied, thinking she had finally reverted to the powerless girl he could torment at will. Nevia knelt before Wood, feigning remorse. She apologized, saying she was mistaken and Wood had done nothing wrong. However, she knew exactly what she was doing. She understood that excessive punishment often invited sympathy rather than blame, and by making herself appear weak, she was turning the situation to her advantage. Wood, pleased with her apology, smiled, thinking he had regained control. However, the Duke quickly realized the situation was becoming embarrassing for him and his family. The servants were whispering amongst themselves, questioning what had just transpired. To divert attention, the Duke declared that Nevia must be in shock from the fire and ordered Philippa to take care of her. He then turned to Wood, sternly telling him to reflect on his actions. When Wood expressed disbelief, the Duke declared him grounded, silencing him. Philippa, Wood's nanny, immediately protested, saying grounding a 10-year-old was too harsh. But the Duke, already enraged, snapped at her. "It starts with you not taking proper care of the children." Philippa, nervously hesitant, tried to respond, but the Duke dismissed her. The Duke turned to Lyndon, the butler, to handle the matter and ordered that Nevia's quarters be moved to the 3rd floor. That area was exclusively for the use of the Agnes family members. Wood protested in shock, but the Duke silenced him with a stern warning, making it clear that further complaints would not be tolerated. Wood, trembling with fear, backed down. The Duke then instructed Lyndon to take Nevia there. Lyndon gently urged her to follow him. Nevia pieced together the situation, realizing she had secured a place on the 3rd floor so easily, all thanks to a single incident. Though it felt like an undeserved reward, she decided to remain silent and accept it, noting the lack of any concern for her well-being. Lyndon led Nevia to her new room, telling her this would be her residence from now on, and assured her a doctor would be sent shortly. Nevia looked around, finding the room rather ordinary. She recalled how desperately she had once yearned to be in this place. At the tender age of 8, she had been too thin and underweight due to the strict dietary restrictions imposed since her adoption. She remembered even food had been used as a reward, conditioning her to perceive delicacies as something special. Standing before the mirror, she examined her red eyes and silver hair. In the past, she had resented her differing appearance from the Agnes family, but now she questioned why she had ever wanted to look like them, feeling a wave of nausea at the thought. Nevia began to cough uncontrollably, her body feeling weak and feverish. She clenched her fists, determined not to let her illness slow her down. She reminded herself that she had no time to be sick. Having lived through 8 regressions, she understood a crucial truth. Whenever Vivian was cured, she would die within a year. Mana reflux disorder was still considered incurable, but she knew that 12 years later, the year she came of age, a cure would be discovered. Reflecting on her past lives, she remembered how desperately she had tried to become a true member of the Agnes family during those 12 years, only to be discarded each time. But this time, she wasn't going to repeat the same mistakes. She had to escape. Nevia recalled the biggest obstacle in her past lives. Crown Prince Ares. No matter how the circumstances changed, he always fixated on possessing her in some way, whether as a slave or a wife. To avoid entanglement with him again, she had to escape the Agnes household. However, imperial law currently dictated that children of noble families must obey their parents, preventing her from leaving on her own. This meant she had 2 key objectives: cure Vivian and find a new noble guardian. She already knew the cure for mana reflux disorder, so that part was within her control. As for finding a new guardian, she had already chosen a potential candidate, Duke Lac Essord. Duke Essord was still single, and while he had no biological heir, the soon-to-be-executed Empress Estelle's 2nd son, Clyde, was expected to become his adopted son. In her 8th life, Nevia had managed to live until that point for the first time. Around that time, Prince Clyde made a grand public appearance with the Duchess Essord, garnering significant attention. He was exceptional in every way, his appearance, abilities, and demeanor setting him apart. Of course, that had nothing to do with her, or so she thought at the time. Nevia considered Prince Clyde's past, realizing he entered the Essord household before the age of 8, meaning he was younger than her. This also meant the heir position would be vacant for at least another year, which aligned with her plans. As she pondered this, the maid Charlotte knocked on the door, bringing in a meal. However, Philippa suddenly barged in, shoving Charlotte aside and yelling at Nevia to kneel and beg the Duke for forgiveness. Philippa was furious about Wood's punishment, seemingly oblivious to the fact that someone had actually died in the fire. Nevia, long accustomed to such discrimination, remained indifferent. She couldn't understand why Wood's brief confinement was considered a tragedy, while far greater injustices were overlooked. Instead of responding to Philippa's demands, she calmly turned to Charlotte, confirming that her meal had arrived. She acknowledged internally that despite enduring abuse for so long, she was no longer willing to accept it. Silence. Frustrated by Nevia's defiance, Philippa yelled at her, demanding to know if she was deliberately ignoring her. She had expected Nevia to tremble in fear at her outburst, but Nevia remained composed, countering Philippa's accusations. She confidently asked what she had done wrong to warrant begging for forgiveness. Taken aback, Philippa scoffed, flustered, insisting that Nevia had caused trouble for young Master Wood. She believed that as the eldest son of the Agnes family and a nobleman, Wood's future shouldn't encounter any obstacles, especially not from someone like Nevia. Philippa reminded Nevia that she was only able to enjoy a luxurious life because of the Duke's grace. and implied she should willingly bear the responsibility to ensure Wood's reputation remained untarnished. However, instead of backing down, Nevia merely offered a scornful smile, further fueling Philippa's anger. Seeing Nevia's confident expression, Philippa seethed, viewing her as nothing more than an insolent brat. Furious, Philippa grabbed Nevia's hand, declaring she had an idea of how to deal with her. Yet, Nevia remained calm, sarcastically stating she now understood her mistake, realizing Philippa had been embezzling funds meant for her and Wood. Philippa was stunned, stammering as she questioned how Nevia could possibly know her secret. Nevia recalled her past life, knowing Philippa had been executed after the Duke discovered her embezzlement. Initially, Philippa had only taken small sums, but her greed had grown over time, and the quality of their food had declined accordingly. Fear crept onto Philippa's face, but she desperately defended herself, scoffing at the accusations and insisting on her unwavering loyalty to the Agnes family. Panic began to set in, however, as she realized the implications. If Nevia told the Duke, she threatened, her tongue would be cut out if she spread such baseless claims. Nevia, unafraid, calmly acknowledged Philippa's loyalty, but pointed out that her actions contradicted the kind of loyalty the Duke valued. She then mused aloud, wondering what the Duke would think if he saw the poor quality of the food she received. Philippa trembled, her voice shaking as she warned Nevia to stop her threats, lest she be whipped. But Nevia remained composed, bringing up another point. Despite her father knowing about the hole the nanny had made in her door, he hadn't taken any action. She speculated that he might have sensed something suspicious. Then, she stated coldly that her father despised betrayal and would be sorely disappointed if he discovered his trusted servant had been stealing from him. At this, Philippa froze. She stumbled back, still attempting to defend herself, angrily demanding to know who had accused her and shouting that there was no evidence against her. She insisted that no one should slander a loyal servant of the Agnes family. Nevia, undeterred, offered a scornful laugh as she turned, sarcastically agreeing. She then declared she would go to the Duke, kneel before him, as Philippa had suggested, and tell him everything. Panicked, Philippa rushed to stop Nevia, desperately pleading with her not to. However, before she could react, Nevia suddenly collapsed. Just then, the doctor entered the room. Charlotte rushed to Nevia's side in shock. "Miss, what's wrong?" Seeing Nevia on the floor, the doctor exclaimed, "What happened?" Philippa became anxious upon seeing the doctor, realizing Charlotte had been present the entire time and might suspect her embezzlement. Meanwhile, Nevia began to cry dramatically, accusing Philippa of mistreating her. She sobbed, saying that even if she wasn't allowed on the third floor, she was merely obeying her father's orders. Philippa, shocked and dismayed, denied it vehemently, but as she tried to defend herself, the doctor sternly reprimanded her for defying the Duke's orders. The doctor demanded to know why she had pushed Nevia. Philippa, flustered, couldn't answer, insisting it was an accident. However, the doctor dismissed her excuse, warning that harming a noble was a serious offense, and ordered her to leave immediately. Philippa trembled, realizing that if the Duke discovered she had treated Nevia so harshly, he might also uncover her embezzlement, which would lead to her execution. Panicked and unsure what to do, she was taken aback when Nevia calmly assured her that she wouldn't tell her father. Philippa was momentarily confused, contemplating Nevia's intentions, but ultimately dismissed her as a naive child. She convinced herself that if she was nice to Nevia for the time being, she could erase any evidence of her crimes. However, she saw Charlotte as a potential threat and began to contemplate how to deal with her. The doctor, unmoved, pointed out Philippa's hesitation. Realizing she had no other choice, Philippa quickly bowed and feigned compliance, claiming she would trust the young lady's word. As Philippa left the room, she fumed, convincing herself she wasn't afraid of Nevia, but rather of the Duke discovering the truth. Meanwhile, the doctor cleared his throat, preparing to treat Nevia, instructing her to lie down. Charlotte also urged her to rest. Nevia complied. While receiving treatment, Nevia pondered Charlotte's true nature. She recalled that after Philippa's execution for embezzlement, Charlotte had taken her place and similarly exploited the foster children. Although Charlotte currently feigned obedience to Philippa, Nevia knew it was merely a tactic to win over the servants who had conflicts with the former nanny. Realizing this, Nevia saw an opportunity to use Charlotte's ambition to her advantage. Nevia confronted Charlotte, pointing out that Charlotte is the only one besides herself herself who knows about Philippa's embezzlement. She questions what Philippa will do next. Risk attacking Nevia, who promised not to expose her, or eliminate Charlotte first. Charlotte feigns ignorance, but Nevia calmly warns her against informing the Duke of Philippa's crimes. If she does, the Duke might start questioning how Charlotte came across such sensitive information, potentially suspecting her involvement as well. Charlotte sweats nervously, realizing the danger of being associated with embezzlement, given the Duke's stern nature. However, Nevia doesn't intend to let Philippa go scot-free. When Charlotte accuses her of wanting to use her, Nevia frankly admits it. She offers Charlotte a chance, bring down Philippa, and she can have all the privileges the previous nanny enjoyed. Charlotte flinches, realizing Nevia is offering her the same opportunity to skim from the child care funds as Philippa did. However, this also means Nevia has seen through Charlotte's weakness, her own greed. Despite knowing she can't refuse, Charlotte is unsettled by Nevia's composure. Nevia chuckles, stating she could never truly be one of the Agnes family, as their relationship is purely transactional. She understands her position as a lowly adopted daughter and knows her future won't be smooth sailing. However, she warns that even a dog, if abused for too long, will bite its owner. Now that she's laid everything bare, she asks what Charlotte intends to do. Charlotte hesitates, aware of the risks involved. She wonders if Nevia is wary of Philippa or if there's something more behind her actions. Unlike the other Agnes children, Nevia possesses remarkable sharpness. Today's fire and her unexpected visit to the third floor, it all seems too coincidental. Charlotte bows and pledges her loyalty to Nevia. Nevia smiles, satisfied, and lays out her plan. She instructs Charlotte to sow discord between Philippa and the cook, making the cook suspect Philippa of embezzlement. Simultaneously, Charlotte must convince Philippa of her loyalty to Nevia, creating a facade that the three of them, Nevia, Charlotte, and the cook, are on the same side. Charlotte hesitates, pointing out that Philippa might try to destroy all evidence. However, Nevia reveals the cook possesses a ledger detailing Philippa's embezzlement, ensuring they have proof when needed. Charlotte is stunned by this revelation and acknowledges the plan before leaving. She offers to prepare a meal for Nevia, but Nevia declines, stating she'll eat later. Charlotte reminds her to call if she needs anything, and then leaves the room, feeling lightheaded. Nevia decides to rest, reassuring herself that she won't let anyone harm her, and gradually drifts off to sleep. She dreams of a pitch-black night sky. Suddenly, she shivers, a giant red eye looking down at her, filling her with dread. Trembling, she finds herself surrounded by countless eyes, feeling like she's about to be swallowed by something. A terrifying dark energy approaches, beginning to seep into her wrist, causing excruciating pain. Just when it seems unbearable, a crescent moon appears, and the dark energy dissipates. Her pain subsides, and her wrist seems to heal. Nevia wakes up, disoriented, her vision blurry. She asks herself in a panic where she is, recalling she was just outside looking at the sky. The terrifying presence in her dream felt like a merciless god. Watching her, she forces herself to calm down, convincing herself it was just a fever dream. Although relieved to find her fever has broken, Nevia looks at her wrist in surprise, noticing a black crescent moon mark, identical to the one in her dream. She recalls it seeming to block something that was trying to devour her, unsure if she should be grateful. This was originally where her regression counter appeared, but now it's been replaced. She sighs, confused and wary, displeased by this unexpected turn of events. The next day, Charlotte informs Nevia of her lesson schedule and suggests she go to the study after her meal. She hesitates when she notices the untouched meal from the previous night, wondering if Nevia is unwell. When she inquires about her condition, Nevia grins, slightly amused, teasing her by asking if she's worried now. She finds it odd Charlotte, as her dedicated maid before, never showed concern for her. Perhaps their newfound alliance has changed things. Nevertheless, Nevia assures her she's fine. Charlotte pauses before responding with a relieved sigh. Nevia casually asks if Charlotte has begun the task she assigned her yesterday. Charlotte hesitates, then confirms she has. While eating, Nevia noticed a significant improvement in the quality of the food. She then remembered she needed to test the visibility of the crescent moon mark on her wrist. Feigning a need to adjust her sleeve, she rolled it up and presented her wrist to Charlotte. She commented that her sleeves seemed a bit short. Charlotte, however, showed no reaction to the mark, simply suggesting that Nevia must have grown taller and offering to alter the sleeves for her. Nevia's suspicion was confirmed. The mark was invisible to others. To be certain, she made another excuse, extending her wrist further, pretending to check the length again. Still oblivious to the mark, Charlotte suggested lengthening the sleeves to cover the back of Nevia's hand. Nevia scrutinized Charlotte's eyes, noticing no reflection of the mark in her pupils. Just like her regression counter in her past life, this mark seemed invisible to others. She wondered if this, like the regression, was unrelated to magic. Putting the thought aside for the moment, she decided to start her day. "All right, let's go to class," she said, preparing for what lay ahead. Nevia headed towards the classroom, determined to escape the Agnes family by curing Vivian's illness. The only person capable of doing so was her tutor, Edward Spencer, a former professor who had taught at the prestigious Holy Empire Academy. Despite his distinguished career, he now seemed to serve the Agnes family as a subordinate. Meanwhile, Edward waited for Nevia, frustrated with his role. He considered her an unremarkable student, timid and cowardly, lacking intelligence, and unsuitable for aristocratic society. However, his true purpose for employment was far more sinister. As a mind control mage, his task was to brainwash Nevia into loyalty to the Agnes family. Though he found manipulating a child cruel, he had no choice but to obey, as he needed the Duke's influence to cure his younger sibling's illness. An incurable disease, mana reflux, an affliction that plagued children born to mage couples. Edward contemplated the fatality of mana reflux, a disease that caused afflicted children to die suddenly before adulthood. Since most mages were nobles, almost all patients came from aristocratic families. Despite his diligent research and professorship at the academy, he struggled to find sufficient research subjects. However, by leveraging the Agnes family's power, he believed he might find a cure. Just then, Nevia entered the classroom, elegantly curtsying and greeting him, expressing her anticipation for the lesson. Edward was taken aback. Her clear voice and graceful demeanor resembled someone trained in imperial etiquette. Her drastic overnight transformation made him question if such a change was truly possible. Regaining his composure, he welcomed her and began the lesson. As Nevia sat down, she noticed Edward looking somewhat foolish. Unlike usual, Edward started the lesson by asking about the nicknames of the three imperial dukes. Nevia confidently answered, naming them: the Water Duke of Agnes, the Fire Duke of Lucia, and the Law Duke of Ethelred. When Edward inquired about why the Ethelred family was titled with law, Nevia explained that they were the first to establish a new civilization based on magical laws. The Ethelred mages studied magical statutes, deciphered formulas, and laid the foundation for the magic system, thus creating magical tools. However, despite these achievements, the family had been declining ever since the current head, Lack Ethelred, took power. Edward was stunned. He had never taught her this information. Astonished by her knowledge, he admitted she was exceptionally well prepared. Nevia confidently pointed out that the Imperial Duffman family specialized in mind control magic, hence earning the title Duffman of Rain. She also mentioned that during the era of the four Grand Dukes, there existed a family called the Urts of Light, and challenged Edward to explain how they vanished from history. Edward, sweating but maintaining his composure, asked what she was implying. Nevia calmly replied that she had nothing left to learn from him. Edward, enraged, slammed his hand on the table, demanding clarification. However, Nevia remained composed, began writing, and handed him the notes. As Edward read them, he was dumbfounded. They contained the complete history of the Eden Empire, written in flawless script as if penned by a master historian. Nevia then calmly asked if he, too, found this lesson a waste of time. Edward, suspicious of Nevia's knowledge, asked if she had another tutor instructing her. Nevia confidently denied it, stating she had extensively studied history independently, and that hiring another tutor would risk exposing her background. Edward was bewildered by her sudden eloquence, wondering if she had somehow brainwashed herself, and resolved to strengthen his control over her. He glared at Nevia, preparing to exert his power. But before he could act, she calmly stated that she knew the cure for mana reflux. Edward, utterly shocked, flinched, demanding to know how she acquired such knowledge, mentioning he hadn't heard anything about Milady. Vivian's recovery. Nevia smiled, revealing that the cure was known only to her. Edward trembled, shocked by Nevia's words. He initially thought she was mocking his desperation, but quickly realized she somehow knew he was searching for a cure for mana reflux, something Duke Agnes would never have told her. This made him deeply suspicious of her intentions. He recalled his mind control magic, which linked his mana to a person's mind, exploiting their desires and weaknesses. For the past year, he had been continuously brainwashing Nevia, making her crave the Agnes family and remain loyal to them. If her brainwashing had weakened, he believed it would be easy to recast the spell and restore everything. Edward attempted to use his mind control magic on Nevia again, but to his disbelief, she remained calm and unaffected. He realized she had no desires or emotional weaknesses for him to manipulate, making it impossible to connect to her mind. Shocked, he wondered what was happening. Nevia smiled knowingly, pointing out that things hadn't gone as he'd planned. Panicked, Edward demanded to know what she wanted, but Nevia corrected him, saying he should ask what he could do for her. Edward clenched his fists in despair, and upon realizing that a cure for mana reflux might actually exist, he abruptly knelt before Nevia. He offered his life in exchange for the cure, insisting that she, as a mage, form a mage's contract with him. However, before he could finish, Nevia calmly revealed that since she had broken free from his brainwashing, she naturally knew he was a mind control mage. Edward was incredulous, realizing Nevia possessed extraordinary mental strength beyond human capabilities. Breaking free from the illusion magic should have caused an unbearable shock to her body, making it impossible, yet she had done it. Nevia calmly proposed a deal. She would teach Edward the cure for mana reflux, and he had to promise her 3 things. First, within 5 days, he could only use this cure on his younger siblings and not on anyone else. Edward was shocked that she knew about his siblings' illness. Second, on the 5th day, he had to visit Duke Agnes and claim to have discovered a cure for mana reflux, but he must never reveal that Nevia taught him. Edward hesitated, confirming whether she truly wanted him to keep her involvement a secret for life, to which Nevia firmly agreed. Finally, her 3rd condition was that Edward must persuade Duke Agnes to send her to the Ethelred family as an heir. Edward was astonished. Nevia stated that the Ethelred family had declined, and it was a place no one desired. Edward questioned her reason for wanting to leave Duke Agnes's mansion, pointing out that staying would allow her to marry a wealthy nobleman. He also warned that although Duke Ethelred was currently single and without an heir, his cousins had heirs, and they might not accept her, possibly even making things difficult for her. Nevia remained composed, acknowledging the danger with a hint of sarcasm, then firmly stated that her decision had nothing to do with him. She thought to herself that Duke Agnes's mansion was already a dangerous place for her, implying that leaving was her only way out. Edward realized how meticulously she had planned, feeling completely cornered by her logic. He had never met anyone who could manipulate a situation so skillfully. However, he didn't feel anger, but rather a strange admiration and curiosity about her true intentions. Finally, with a sense of resignation and inquisitiveness, he bowed to her, agreeing to the contract and finalizing their agreement. Edward extended his hand, mana patterns appearing, and Nevia placed her hand over his, finalizing their contract. The agreement was made. Edward declared that they were now bound by the contract. Nevia calmly explained the cure. First, absorb the overflowing mana from the patient's body, creating a temporary vacuum. Then the energy must be correctly rain-fused to restore balance. Edward was astonished, realizing the method had been right in front of him all along. He cried out in shock, finally understanding the truth. Nevia admitted that although the process would be difficult without masterful skill, Edward should be capable enough to accomplish it. After all, he was the one who initially discovered the cure. Edward muttered in disbelief, then thanked the heavens. Meanwhile, Nevia watched him with a melancholic expression. She pondered the contrast in his character. He was a caring brother to his sister, a person capable of good, but she didn't understand why he was always so cruel to her. Nevia recalled a painful memory from her past life. In despair, she had begged Edward to persuade her father to tell him the truth. Her family never intended for her to become queen. They merely saw her as a sacrifice. But Edward responded coldly, telling her it was simply her destiny. He argued that even if the barbarian king was brutal, he was still a king, implying it was better than chasing the illusion of a princess. Nevia had insisted she didn't care about status, she just wanted a family. Yet Edward remained unmoved by her desperation, finding her pathetic, no matter how remarkable her efforts seemed at the time. In her sixth life, when she was being trafficked, Nevia had clung to Edward, begging for his help. It was then that the cruel truth dawned on her. It turned out Edward had been the one to suggest her as a sacrifice in the first place. She had once believed that, as her mentor, he might have held a sliver of affection for her. She had thought that if she tried hard enough, if she genuinely did everything right, he might show her even a shred of kindness. But that hope was nothing more than a cruel illusion. Nevia reflected on her past lives, realizing how deeply she had been manipulated. The illusions and brainwashing had forced her to crave love and acceptance, making her an easy target. Breaking free from that illusion took her an entire lifetime, her seventh. As a result, she developed a mental barrier, enabling her to resist illusion. Magic. In her eighth life, she acted entirely of her own volition for the first time. It was the life she lived the longest and received the most recognition. But in the end, she still failed. Love, family, everything she longed for was nothing but a phantom. It was then that what appeared, mockingly calling her born this way. Nevia immediately realized he must have put some thought into this, as entering the East Wing during her lessons was forbidden. Wood smirked smugly, assuming she would think he'd let it slide. Nevia impassively noted that he had been waiting in an empty, undisturbed hallway, clearly planning to punish her. She found his little scheme almost laughable, feeling a sardonic amusement at his petty games. She sighed, bracing herself for whatever came next. Would threaten Nevia, declaring that today he would personally make her. She cut him off, asking if he was going to kill her. Wood stammered in shock, denying he had said such a thing. Nevia questioned why he was waiting for her like a skulking rat. She smirked, mocking him, calling him pathetic. Wood strode towards her furiously, demanding to know if she really wanted to die. Nevia remained impassive, stating he hadn't changed a bit. She then goaded him, telling him to go ahead and kill her. Inwardly, she knew that while Wood would grow into a ruthless killer in the future, right now he was just a 10-year-old child. She further provoked him, daring him to try, saying their father would probably be pleased. Wood flinched, taken aback by her boldness. Nevia realized Wood was just a 10-year-old who could, at most, lock her in a room with bugs. He couldn't bear the weight of murder. Wood hesitated, questioning why she wasn't running and threatening to actually kill her. Unafraid of death, Nevia grabbed his hand, forcing it around her own neck, daring him to go through with it. Panicked, Wood struggled to break free from her grip, yelling at her to let go. In the process, he accidentally activated his water magic, trapping Nevia in a sphere of water. Nevia found herself shocked, surrounded by water and unable to move. Wood burst out laughing, taunting her that she had provoked him and now looked pretty. As Nevia desperately tried to break free, she realized her body wouldn't obey. Wood explained with a smug grin that magic water wasn't like ordinary water. It obeyed his will completely. Nevia struggled within Wood's water magic. She experienced a terrifying sense of déjà vu, feeling exactly like she did when she drowned in the lake in her first life. It made her wonder if that incident had truly been an accident. Wood mocked her, claiming victory. But Nevia was stunned, wondering how he had acquired such powerful magic. Refusing to accept death, she clenched her fists, triggering the crescent moon-shaped mark on her wrist to glow. Unexpectedly, Nevia countered Wood's magic, absorbing it into herself. Breaking free, she realized with astonishment that the black moon had absorbed Wood's magic, awakening a mysterious new ability. Wood stared in shock as Nevia broke free from his water magic, unable to believe what he was seeing. He stammered in disbelief, realizing her abilities were beyond his comprehension. Nevia glared at him, sensing she could redirect the absorbed magic back at him. Wood, overwhelmed by fear, stumbled backward, trembling. A chill ran down his spine when Nevia called him brother, his confidence utterly shattered. He tried to regain control, yelling at her to stop, but Nevia smirked, reminding him that violence should be met with greater violence. A lesson their father had taught her himself. Summoning the magic to her hand, she turned Wood's own water magic against him, trapping him with the same suffocating spell he had used on her. As Wood struggled, Nevia coldly taunted him, asking how it felt to be drowning. She knew she wasn't a mage and couldn't maintain the spell for long, but it was enough to teach him a lesson. She laughed triumphantly, warning him that he wouldn't die from this. This wasn't an accident that could be covered up. Wood, terrified and helpless, was consumed by fear. With a playful smirk, Nevia loudly cried out that Wood was drowning, that he was in danger, feigning a call for help just to toy with him. Her playful yet mocking tone further fueled Wood's fear, making him realize how helpless he was in this situation. Meanwhile, Duke Agnes was reading a letter, a tea party invitation that subtly requested a tour of the Queen's palace. The writer also expressed curiosity about Tapir's decorating skills, mentioning his past style of using spotted animal furs, a style reminiscent of bourgeois house decor. At the end of the letter, there was a pointed mention of Nevia's beauty, with the writer abruptly inquiring about her true origins. Duke Agnes immediately understood the hidden intentions within the letter. He suspected the Queen was trying to uncover Nevia's true background. However, Duke Agnes smiled confidently, reassuring himself that he had already made all the necessary preparations regarding Nevia's identity. He wouldn't let anyone discover the secret he had so carefully guarded. Edward Spencer, though the mind control he had placed on her had weakened, she suddenly threatened him, implying that admitting this fact would make things easier for him in the future. Realizing he had no choice, Edward yielded, which ultimately led to the premature end of the lesson. Duke Agnes suspected that the weakening of Nevia's brainwashing was due to the fire the previous day. He grew increasingly frustrated, realizing that at this crucial moment, when the Queen had already started to notice Nevia, the biggest obstacle in his career was his own son, Wood. Edward advised him to remain calm and assured him that handling this situation wouldn't be difficult. The Duke pondered how to maintain stability, perhaps by showering Wood with more luxuries, like new clothes, jewelry, or even throwing a lavish party. Suddenly, a servant rushed in, yelling about an emergency. Wood was trapped in a pillar of water. The Duke, alarmed, hurried to the east wing. There, he found Wood coughing, finally freed from the magic. A maid informed him that Wood had been rescued just in time. Otherwise, the situation would have been dire. Duke Agnes was shocked to hear that Wood had been trapped in a water pillar, especially since the east wing had been off limits for quite some time. A maid hesitantly explained that, according to Nevia, Wood's spell had backfired while he was casting it, trapping him within. Hearing Nevia's name, the Duke grew suspicious. He noticed that both Wood and Nevia were soaked, realizing that something unusual must have happened. The fact that this incident occurred right after he was instructed to remain calm further fueled his worry that Nevia's brainwashing might have weakened. He turned to Nevia, asking her about the situation. Nevia quickly feigned innocence and nervousness, inwardly cursing herself. She was disgusted by the Duke prioritizing checking her loyalty over concern for his own son's well-being. Feigning guilt, she said she had asked Wood to demonstrate his magic skills, suddenly twisting the situation to her advantage. Duke Agnes observed Nevia's actions, concluding that her behavior wasn't related to the brainwashing issue. He surmised that she had simply become curious about magic after the accident and requested Wood to display his skills. However, Nevia had her own hidden agenda. Appeasing the Duke wasn't her true objective. Nevia approached Wood with feigned concern, asking if he was all right and addressing him as brother. This infuriated Wood, who saw it as mockery. In a fit of rage, he started hitting Nevia, accusing her of trapping him in the water pillar and calling her a monster. The Duke intervened, stopping Wood and demanding an explanation. Wood furiously claimed that Nevia had stolen his magic skills and used them against him. This revelation shocked the Duke, leading him to suspect that Nevia might be a replication mage, a rare, and powerful ability in the world of magic. He recalled the two fundamental principles of magic. 1. Mages awaken their abilities. 2. Magic is typically inherited. However, replication magic was an extraordinary ability that allowed one to copy and utilize any magic they came into contact with, making it an incredibly privileged gift. Duke Agnes pondered the implications of Nevia possibly possessing the rare replication magic ability. He remembered that replication mages could only copy a fraction of another mage's skills, but even that small amount of power, if given to the queen, would be a waste. To confirm his suspicions, he used magic to scan Nevia. However, he didn't detect any fluctuations of the replication ability, only traces of Wood's magic. This puzzled him. Nevia feigned innocence, claiming that when Wood used his magic, she saw a flash of blue light, and then he was trapped in the water pillar. The Duke interpreted this as a sign of overuse of magic and dismissed his earlier suspicions. He scolded Wood, reminding him to be careful when using magic. Wood, still furious, insisted Nevia was lying and that there was no blue light. However, Duke Agnes ignored his protests and gently told Nevia to return to her room, assuring her he would discipline Wood. This left Wood shocked and frustrated. He couldn't believe the Duke was taking Nevia's side. Meanwhile, Nevia inwardly laughed, finding Wood's temper and how easily he lost control over minor setbacks amusing. As she walked away, she paused briefly, turning back to give Wood a triumphant smirk, mocking his overreaction. Wood roared in fury, threatening to kill her, but she simply smiled and left, thinking to herself that she had finally stirred up some chaos in this household. On her way back to her room, she passed a group of maids who began whispering amongst themselves, curious about what had happened in the East Wing. They speculated about a flood, and that Nevia was somehow involved. Despite being drenched, they were impressed by her composure and elegance. Even with wet shoes, she walked gracefully, her fingers smoothing her silk dress in a way that made it look refined rather than disheveled. The maids couldn't help but admire Nevia, noting that there wasn't a single thing about her that wasn't graceful. Charlotte brought a blanket for Nevia, urging her to warm up. Nevia thanked her and wrapped herself in the blanket. She reflected on the maid's whispers, realizing she had instinctively displayed the etiquette ingrained in her over the years. However, she consoled herself that knowing etiquette was beneficial. It would help her stay in Duke Agnes's favor until she could finally leave this place. Just then, Vivi arrived, clutching her large teddy bear, accompanied by a group of maids. Upon seeing Nevia, she immediately demanded to know why she was there, pointing out that this was the 3rd floor. Nevia, unfazed, recognized Vivi's usual attitude. Vivi turned to her maid, Maggie, and asked if the person before her was indeed Nevia. Maggie giggled, confirming it, prompting laughter from the other maids. Nevia remained calm, but inwardly acknowledged the blatant disrespect in their words and tone. Nevia approached Vivi with a gentle smile, feigning ignorance. "I'm sorry, Vivi. They were laughing so loud. I couldn't hear what you said. Could you repeat that?" Maggie was taken aback by Nevia's composed reaction. Vivi, meanwhile, asked cheerfully, "Isn't your room on the 2nd floor? Are you here on the 3rd floor to see Vivi?" Nevia maintained her polite demeanor, replying, "Ah, so that's what you wanted to ask. Father just allowed me to live on the 3rd floor." Vivi was overjoyed at this news. "Wow, really? That's great," she exclaimed, unexpectedly hugging Nevia. However, as soon as Vivi realized Nevia was soaked, she recoiled in disgust. "What's this? Being wet is so uncomfortable, it's dirty." Nevia was slightly taken aback by her reaction. But before Charlotte could step forward to explain, Nevia stopped her. "Charlotte, it's all right," she said calmly. Nevia thought to herself that antagonizing Vivi would only put her at a disadvantage. Vivi was the real princess. Her faults would always be forgiven. Nevia, on the other hand, was merely playing Vivi's role. Despite Vivi's simple-mindedness, she always tried to be a kind and honest older sister. She remembered Vivi had once suffered from a serious illness, but now her condition had gradually improved. Dwelling on the past was pointless. Ever since Nevia's previous life had ended, Vivi's backflow magic sickness had been cured. She had observed this moment time and time again. Nevia smiled to herself, deciding she didn't want to blame Vivi. However, Vivi seemed upset and apologized, saying it was troublesome to take care of her. Nevia calmly explained that she had been playing with her brother, and that's why she was all wet. Meanwhile, Vivi's nanny, Maggie, disliked seeing Vivi close to Nevia. She gritted her teeth, thinking Nevia was a bad person, excluding Vivi. She believed Vivi wanted to play with water too. However, Nevia gently warned Vivi that she would get sick and told her not to play with water because something bad had happened in the East Wing. Hearing this, Vivi began to sob, accusing Nevia of making up a lame excuse and insisting she should at least come up with a smarter, more plausible one. Watching Vivi's reaction, Nevia couldn't help but think Vivi was nothing but a foolish, hypocritical princess. Nevia gently tried to comfort Vivi, suggesting she bring some toys to the bathroom to play with. However, Vivi cried even harder, insisting she wanted to play with her brother. Nevia calmly soothed her, saying they could play together next time, and explaining that her brother was busy and didn't have time to play with her now. But Vivi didn't believe her and suddenly ran off, determined to see him herself and talk to him. One of the maids hurried after Vivi, pleading with her not to run off like that. Meanwhile, Maggie glared daggers at Nevia, clearly blaming her for making Vivi cry. After they left, Charlotte, distressed by the situation, scolded Nevia for treating Vivi that way, especially in front of Maggie. Nevia, however, remained calm, explaining that she had been mistreated for so long that she was numb to their actions. It wasn't the first or second time they had treated her this way. Changing the subject, she asked Charlotte to prepare pumpkin porridge and cool herbal tea, instructing her to tell the kitchen staff it was for her father, so they would do it without hesitation. Charlotte agreed and, before leaving, offered to help Nevia change her clothes. Nevia wondered what the Duke was planning by having dessert prepared for him, suspecting it wasn't that simple. Dismissing the thought, she decided to handle it herself. She told Charlotte to bring the dessert quickly while she headed to the library. Upon entering, she pondered the nature of the Agnes family. Though immensely wealthy, their fortune was their only strength, unlike the Ethelred family, who had cultivated powerful mages for generations. The Agnes family had no truly gifted magic users. Despite possessing potent mana, they lacked the ability to properly develop it. To compensate for this weakness, the Agnes family had constructed a vast reading room filled with countless books, hoping knowledge would make up for their innate magical shortcomings. Picking up a few books, Nevia thought about how she was the only one who ever used this library. She was determined to uncover the truth about the Black Moon. However, despite having read almost every book she could find, she still hadn't found a clear answer. Even so, she knew she had to keep searching. Lost in thought, she suddenly sneezed. Realizing she might have caught a cold from sitting in wet clothes for too long, she wished for some warm water to soothe her discomfort. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the mansion, Wood was struggling furiously, resisting the maids who were trying to help him change out of his soaked clothes. He yelled at them angrily to leave him alone. The maids desperately tried to calm him down. Duke Agnes watched the scene, silently assessing his son. With his outstanding appearance, prominent family background, and inherently powerful magic, which strongly reminded him of his younger self. Frustrated and furious, would order the maids to bring Nevia to him, declaring he would kill her. Watching his son's outburst, the Duke felt his anger rise at Wood directing so much rage at a mere commoner girl with no noble power. But before he could speak, Vivi appeared, looking visibly upset. She demanded to know why Wood had a water fight with Nevia. Without inviting her, the Duke tried to explain that Wood wasn't playing with Nevia and urged Vivi to drop it. However, Wood, still enraged, yelled at Vivi to go away. His harsh words brought tears to Vivi's eyes, and she asked her brother if he really wanted to kill her. The Duke frowned at Wood, deeply displeased with his behavior. He scolded him, saying he was going too far. Wood argued that Vivi was making fun of him. The Duke sighed, gently pulling Vivi into his arms to comfort her. He reminded Wood that his sister was only 6 and didn't understand anything. Vivi burst into tears at Wood's harshness. Wood, frustrated, questioned why his father was blaming him, arguing that the lowly commoner had tried to kill him. He demanded to know why Nevia hadn't been beheaded. The Duke glared at his son, furious that Wood's actions were tarnishing his name. Without hesitation, he declared that if Wood continued like this, his allowance would be revoked. Wood cried out in shock, but the Duke wasn't finished. He went on to announce that the upcoming hunting trip would be canceled and Wood would be forbidden from attending any noble gatherings. Wood froze, stunned. His anger towards Nevia intensified. To be punished like this, despite being the heir to the Agnes family, was a humiliation he couldn't bear. However, under his father's stern gaze, he hesitated, finally reluctantly apologizing and admitting it was his fault. Satisfied, the Duke ordered him back to his room. He then turned to the maids, issuing a chilling warning. If news of the children's quarrel spread, they would be held accountable. Afterwards, Lyndon, the butler, informed the Duke that Lord Spencer had left and promised not to divulge anything that had happened that day. The Duke acknowledged this with a weary expression, internally lamenting the continuous disturbances. Just then, Charlotte arrived with a tray. She informed the Duke that Miss Nevia had sent him some light refreshments. The Duke, surprised, inquired about this, and Charlotte confirmed that the refreshments were indeed from Nevia. Lyndon observed the situation, thinking it unnecessary for a grown man like the Duke to have such bland food. Meanwhile, Charlotte presented the food, explaining it was cool herbal tea and pumpkin soup. The Duke looked at the meal, finding it somewhat unusual. Lyndon, assuming Nevia was simply inexperienced in selecting appropriate food, suggested replacing it with something more suitable. However, the Duke immediately dismissed the suggestion, stating there was no need for any changes. He picked up a spoon and took a taste. To his surprise, despite the soup's simple appearance, the taste was unexpectedly delicious. He found it even more satisfying than the extravagant and visually appealing dishes he was accustomed to. Without hesitation, he continued eating. He curiously asked Charlotte if Nevia had personally requested this meal. Charlotte confirmed, explaining that Nevia thought he might be hungry and had instructed her to prepare something light. The Duke couldn't help but chuckle in disbelief, even though Nevia wasn't his biological daughter. He found her seemingly perfect demeanor almost absurd. Amused, he chuckled and admitted that Nevia was far more mature than her age. Realizing she needed proper winter clothes and accessories, he instructed Lyndon to contact Ancier Boutique to prepare all the necessities for her. Both Lyndon and Charlotte were stunned by his decision, as Ancier Boutique was renowned for its prestigious status. Charlotte bowed, saying that Nevia would be overjoyed as her current clothes were of common quality. Lyndon, however, hesitated, wanting to raise some concerns about the boutique. Before he could finish, the Duke sternly questioned whether his decision needed repeating. Understanding his unquestionable tone, Lyndon immediately apologized and assured him he would follow the instructions. Charlotte excitedly went to the library, calling for Nevia. After Nevia responded, Charlotte told her she had brought warm water and a blanket in case she felt cold. However, Nevia was more concerned about whether the refreshments had been delivered to the Duke. Charlotte confirmed and curiously asked how Nevia knew the Duke's preferences, saying it was the first time she'd seen him make such an expression while having pumpkin soup. Nevia inwardly thought this was one of the perks of reincarnation. Charlotte then shared even bigger news. The Duke, as a gesture of gratitude, had ordered clothes for her from Ancier Boutique. Nevia asked in surprise if it was true. Charlotte enthusiastically explained that other nobles had to wait a long time for their orders, but anything requested by the Agnes family arrived within 2 days. She added that Nevia would have many beautiful dresses. Upon hearing this, Nevia smiled to herself, acknowledging the Duke's considerable effort. However, she felt surprised, as she had never received anything from that boutique before. Ancier Boutique had always exclusively sent clothes to Vivi. Nevia recalled a past scene where Vivi excitedly showed off her new dress, proudly stating that, thanks to their father, she was the only noble who could wear Ancier Boutique's latest designs. Nevia had smiled and expressed her own desire to wear an Ancier dress for her coming-of-age ceremony. However, Vivi had responded with a smug sneer, sarcastically suggesting Nevia look for a dress in a common shop, implying that no one cared about her, so she had to fend for herself. Now, Nevia reflected on that memory, realizing she had believed Vivi's words to be innocent at the time. In retrospect, however, she understood it was likely Vivi's way of ensuring no one questioned her position as the true Agnes princess. She wondered if Vivi had realized this since she was 6. Turning to Charlotte, Nevia instructed her not to tell anyone about this. Charlotte hesitated but agreed, suggesting it wouldn't hurt to show off a little. However, Nevia firmly refused. Wood, still seething with rage, was throwing things around his room, repeatedly vowing to kill Nevia and everyone else. Just then, Philippia arrived, her expression worried, and gasped at the disarray. Seeing Wood drenched, she flinched, then immediately berated a maid, slapping her for no apparent reason, blaming her for not taking proper care of the young master. The terrified maid could only apologize as Philippia grew increasingly frustrated, believing nothing could be done properly in her absence. Wood then explained his fury, blaming everything on Nevia. He claimed Nevia had tried to kill him and couldn't understand why his father chose to protect her. Philippia, both shocked and concerned, insisted that Nevia had to be sent away. Wood, still enraged, further complained that because of Nevia, he was soaked, and worse, his father had punished him, threatening to cut his allowance, forbid him from hunting, and ban him from noble gatherings. Philippia was incredulous, finding it unbelievable that the Duke would treat Wood so harshly. Philippia seethed, finding it unacceptable that someone like Nevia would dare to belittle Wood, the esteemed firstborn son of the illustrious Agnes family. As the family's most loyal servant, she considered this disrespect unforgivable. Recalling Nevia's earlier threat regarding her embezzlement, her fury intensified. The audacity of a child, not even a true member of the Agnes family, to even mention the matter was preposterous. In her mind, using that money to take care of herself was perfectly justified. Meanwhile, Wood remained furious, declaring he couldn't live under the same roof as a commoner who tried to kill him. Philippia wholeheartedly agreed, insisting they couldn't let this matter slide. However, she also suspected someone must have told Nevia about the embezzlement. The girl couldn't have discovered it on her own. Her mind raced, wondering if the steward involved had betrayed her. Charlotte also seemed highly suspicious, considering the apparent alliance between Charlotte, the steward, and Nevia. Determined to act, Philippia devised a plan. She would soon compile a list of the chef's mistakes, and then abruptly implicate Charlotte in those errors as well, ensuring both threats were eliminated. With a cunning smile, she turned to Wood, subtly manipulating him with assurances of unwavering support. She promised him that if there was anything she could do to help, he only had to ask. Intrigued, Wood inquired if she had a plan. Philippia told him to wait a little longer, vowing she wouldn't stand idly by while those obstacles affected his future. The next morning, Nevia continued to pore over books, trying to find any helpful information. She scanned the various titles, finding none contained what she sought. Frustrated, she stretched her weary body and decided to check the last book, titled Foreign Gods. She began to read. She discovered a connection between the Black Moon cycle and the foreign gods. According to the book, these deities symbolized a disregard for morality and the insignificance of human existence. Their power was rooted in chaos, enabling them to break the laws governing the world. Nevia pondered the implications of this information. If the world's laws dictated how magic functioned, then her reincarnation-related abilities were something else entirely. Magic couldn't interfere with life and death, yet reincarnation defied this fundamental principle. If her power truly stemmed from the foreign gods, did that mean her birth parents had concealed something? She clenched her fists, recalling how they had abandoned her in an orphanage as a newborn, leaving behind only a card with her name. It felt as though they had deliberately erased her existence. With a sullen expression, she closed the book. She scoffed at the irony, naming a child they never intended to raise. Yawning, she sighed in disappointment, feeling all her efforts had yielded no significant results. Charlotte entered, immediately noticing Nevia had likely been up all night. She was relieved to find out Nevia had no classes that day. She informed her that Mr. Spencer had granted her 3 days off, though she wasn't sure why. Nevia thought of Edward Spencer, guessing he must have gone to treat her sister, thinking that things were just beginning. Charlotte then asked if she was hungry. As if in response, Nevia's stomach growled, startling Charlotte. Nevia smiled, asking if some warm soup would be all right. Charlotte cheerfully assured her that would be perfect, mentioning she had also prepared some apple juice the previous day. She quickly offered to bring both. Nevia, slightly surprised by the sudden kindness, expressed her gratitude as Charlotte gently inquired about her well-being. This made Charlotte realize how grateful she was. Reflecting on the past, Charlotte noted Nevia had never received juice or sweets before due to the Duke's strict restrictions. If she wanted to bring her anything, it had to be done secretly. Determined to make up for it, Charlotte decided to pour Nevia a large jug of juice. Charlotte entered the kitchen, only to find Maggie already there. Maggie immediately taunted her, feigning surprise and asking if she was preparing food for Nevia. Charlotte felt nervous and confused, wondering why there were so many people there so early. Could Miss Vivian be up earlier than usual? Trying to shake off her unease, she told Maggie to mind her own business and proceeded with her task. However, Maggie wouldn't let it go easily. She snidely commented on Charlotte's good fortune, having Nevia's food prepared so quickly while the rest of them had to carry heavy loads. The other maids joined in, mocking Charlotte. Charlotte quickly noticed someone taking an unusually large amount of apple juice, finding it odd. Maggie, with a smug grin, announced that Miss Vivian had generously offered the apple juice to everyone, encouraging the maids to take as much as they wanted. She argued that since no one but their miss was allowed to drink it anyway, they might as well take it all. The other maids chimed in, sarcastically asking Charlotte if she planned to give the juice to Nevia, their giggles adding insult to injury. Meanwhile, Maggie discreetly signaled a maid to add something to Nevia's juice, whispering to her to slip it in while Charlotte wasn't looking. The maid nodded and spiked the juice. As instructed, Maggie then handed the juice to Charlotte, casually telling her to take it to Nevia. She added that it was no big deal to sneak a sip and hinted that, if Nevia became the crown princess, she might reward Charlotte. Maggie smirked, saying that's just how life is. Deep down, Maggie resented Nevia, believing they couldn't stand idly by and let an imposter cause chaos like the day before. However, Charlotte, uneasy with Maggie's attitude, couldn't resist taking the juice. Knowing Nevia would appreciate it, she decided to respond politely and offered to help Maggie carry Miss Vivian's food. Maggie feigned surprise, telling Charlotte it wasn't necessary, but Charlotte insisted and began arranging the food onto the tray. When Charlotte asked if she could put the apple juice on the same tray, Maggie swiftly took the glass from her and placed it on another maid's tray, subtly retaining control over it. The maid carrying the heavy tray complained about its weight, struggling to hold it up. Charlotte, relieved that everything was finally settled, prepared to fetch Nevia's meal. Maggie smiled and told Charlotte they should help each other out more often. As soon as Charlotte left the kitchen, Maggie and the other maids burst into laughter, mocking her. They raised their glasses of apple juice in a sarcastic toast, giggling at their prank. They joked about being in trouble if the masters found out they drank the juice and couldn't explain themselves. One maid giggled, feigning a plea for forgiveness, while another mentioned the chef's visit to the doctor and his continued absence, proof of the laxative's effectiveness, praising Maggie's cunning. Another maid commented on how terrifying she was. Maggie smirked, confirming the laxative should be taking effect by now. One of the maids excitedly urged everyone to hurry upstairs, eager to witness the results. Laura, carrying Miss Vivian's tray, agreed, stating they couldn't be late and miss all the fun. Suddenly, Laura clutched her stomach in pain, her face contorted in agony. She dropped the tray, spilling all the food on the floor. Maggie flew into a rage, yelling at Laura. She berated her for ruining the meal, reminding her that Miss Vivian had been looking forward to the apple juice all day. Laura groaned, barely able to speak through the pain. Maggie's expression shifted from anger to shock and panic as she realized something was wrong. Could Charlotte have switched the juice? The other maids now anxiously asked Maggie what they should do. They panicked, realizing that if they hadn't drunk their share, they might have had some left for Miss Vivian. Maggie, seething with rage, clenched her fists and cursed Charlotte. She screamed in frustration, calling Charlotte a damned thief, furious that her plan had backfired. Nevia was resting in her room when Charlotte arrived with her meal. Charlotte gently woke her, urging her to eat. Nevia blinked awake, and Charlotte, mentioning she might have caught a cold, brought her medicine. She suggested Nevia have some soup and take the medicine before going back to sleep. She also cheerfully added that she had brought apple juice. Nevia's eyes lit up with excitement, delighted that Charlotte had brought the juice. She eagerly lifted the glass and took a small sip, thanking Charlotte. Although she had eaten apples before, this was her first time drinking apple juice. She noted the glass was quite large. Having just tasted it, she was stunned by its incredible sweetness. Charlotte happily asked how it tasted. Nevia smiled, saying it was delicious, and now she finally knew what apple juice tasted like. Wanting to share the experience, she invited Charlotte to drink with her. Charlotte was taken aback. While apple juice was a bit expensive for her, it wasn't something she had never had before. However, seeing Nevia, who had never tasted apple juice, willing to share such a precious thing with her, she was deeply touched. She reassured Nevia, encouraging her to finish the juice, feeling it was the right decision to bring it to her. Nevia, enjoying a day with sweet juice and no lessons, felt like it was her birthday. However, she thought the glass was unusually large and heavy. She thanked Charlotte for bringing the meal, but Charlotte revealed that Miss Vivian's maids had brought the glass, and they had been acting suspiciously in the kitchen. Suspecting foul play, Charlotte switched the glasses, believing Maggie had laced the original one with a laxative. Nevia realized that someone else must have drunk the drug juice. She then asked for her cold medicine and, instead of swallowing it, dropped it into her own juice. Charlotte was puzzled. Suddenly, Maggie and Steward Linden barged in without knocking, catching Charlotte off guard. Maggie took control of the situation, falsely accusing Charlotte of stealing the glass and attempting to frame her. As Charlotte tried to defend herself, Maggie presented the glass to Steward Linden, claiming it was the missing one. Maggie twisted the facts, feigning innocence and making Charlotte appear to be lying. Steward Linden, angered by the accusation, reprimanded Charlotte. Maggie escalated the situation by mentioning that one of the glasses was drugged, laced with a laxative, implying Charlotte's actions could have harmed Miss Vivian. Fearing the consequences, Steward Linden decided to transfer Charlotte to the laundry room and planned to dismiss her later, afraid he too would be punished if the masters found out. As Steward Linden scolded Charlotte and ordered her to the laundry room, Nevia suddenly cried out in pain, clutching her stomach. Everyone was startled, and Charlotte, both confused and worried, rushed to Nevia's side. Certain she had given Nevia the untainted glass, she then recalled Nevia deliberately mixing her cold medicine into the apple juice earlier, and it dawned on her. Charlotte immediately turned her fury on Maggie, accusing her of deliberately giving her the drug juice. Maggie and Steward Linden were caught off guard. Flustered, Maggie tried to cover up, insisting Nevia must be faking it. She lied, saying only one glass was drugged, and it was meant for Miss Vivian, not Nevia. However, her nervous reaction betrayed her scheme. Charlotte noticed Maggie's nervousness and smirked, realizing Maggie had slipped up due to Nevia's unexpected reaction. She cleverly pointed out the flaw in Maggie's story. If only one glass was drugged, how could Maggie be so certain which one was safe? Maggie hesitated but still tried to cover up, claiming Charlotte must have taken the normal glass. However, Charlotte shifted the focus back to Nevia's condition, reminding Steward Linden that ensuring Nevia's well-being was paramount. Linden, now in a predicament, awkwardly agreed, frustrated and eager to prove her innocence. Maggie grabbed Nevia's apple juice and drank it. She took one sip and was shocked to realize something was wrong. Nausea, confusion, and anxiety washed over her as panic set in. She couldn't understand why the juice tasted different and why Laura had fallen ill earlier. Charlotte cleverly pointed out that since Nevia had never had apple juice before, she wouldn't know if it tasted off. However, Maggie's panicked reaction proved there was indeed something wrong with the drink. Steward Linden, realizing the inconsistencies in Maggie's story, demanded an explanation. Maggie nervously tried to shift the blame, insisting Laura had already drunk the drugged one. But Charlotte countered, demanding she produce the alleged evidence she claimed to have. She then insinuated that perhaps spoiled fruit had been mixed into the juice, trapping Maggie in her own lie. Cornered, Maggie had no choice but to back down, claiming she must have been mistaken. Seeing the situation spiraling out of control, Linden decided to put an end to the matter before it reached the already unwell masters. He ordered Maggie to take responsibility and call a doctor for Nevia, warning her of severe consequences if she caused any more trouble. Defeated, Maggie bowed her head in apology. Charlotte mockingly urged Maggie to hurry and fetch the doctor, knowing any delay could worsen Nevia's condition and land Maggie in serious trouble. Annoyed but unable to retort, Maggie forced a smile and left the room. Afterward, Steward Linden sternly warned Charlotte against going against the master's wishes again and to prevent similar incidents in the future. However, to make amends for what had transpired, he informed her that someone from Anson Boutique would be arriving in the morning with some trinkets and abruptly suggested she should take a look. Charlotte realized Linden was trying to smooth things over to prevent the masters from hearing about the incident, and she felt guilty. Acknowledging he was the only one who truly cared about Nevia, or even her. Flustered by her gratitude, Linden brushed off her concerns, told her to get back to work, and left. Left alone, Charlotte breathed a sigh of relief. Nevia then instructed her to pour the juice into a flower pot, ensuring no one else would drink it. Charlotte agreed, wondering which flower pot to use. Nevia, now feeling much better, smiled in relief as she could breathe properly again. The next morning, people from Anson Boutique arrived with gifts for Nevia. Steward Linden welcomed them and instructed the servants to take everything to the third floor. Meanwhile, Miss Vivian happened to see the boutique staff from the third floor and misunderstood the situation. She assumed the gifts were for her and became excited. An elated maid ran to tell Miss Vivian that the gifts had arrived, expressing admiration for their master's attentiveness. Miss Vivian, beaming with a blissful smile, believed her father had sent the gifts to appease her after her displeasure yesterday. She giggled, eager to show the gifts to Nevia, thinking Nevia would surely be envious of their exquisiteness. Maggie smirked, pleased that Miss Vivian was reinforcing the notion of Nevia's insignificance in the house. Miss Vivian excitedly asked when the gifts would be brought to her, prompting Laura to go and check. Maggie reminded her to check if anyone was peeking from the opposite room. Laura, amused, agreed and cautiously glanced towards the hall. She returned, shocked. When Maggie asked what was wrong, Laura hesitated, unable to comprehend what she had just witnessed. Meanwhile, the boutique staff arrived at Nevia's room, knocked, and informed her that Duke Agnes had sent gifts. Charlotte let them in. Maggie, upon realizing the gifts were actually for Nevia and not Miss Vivian, was stunned in disbelief. Seeing that even Nevia received gifts from Anson Boutique, Maggie felt annoyed. Noticing Maggie's reaction, Miss Vivian asked her what was wrong, causing Maggie to flinch nervously. Just then, Miss Vivian saw the boutique staff carrying the gifts towards Nevia's room. Confused, she wondered why they were taking the gifts there, believing they belonged to her. Curious, Miss Vivian followed them, peeking into Nevia's room, only to be stunned by the sight. Nevia sitting calmly in a chair, leisurely sipping tea, surrounded by a mountain of gifts. As realization dawned upon her, she questioned whether this was truly Nevia's room. Were those gifts truly for Nevia? Noticing Miss Vivian peeking, Nevia greeted her with a smile, asking if she was feeling unwell as she looked pale. However, Miss Vivian was utterly crushed by the scene. She interpreted it as Nevia taking her place, taking her position as the one to marry Prince Ares, and ultimately replacing her. Heartbroken and overwhelmed, Miss Vivian ran back to her room. Nevia called after her, but Miss Vivian's heart was filled with resentment. She saw Nevia as someone who came to ruin her life. Upon returning to her room, she was so upset that when Maggie tried to approach her, she angrily yelled at everyone to leave her alone immediately. As all this unfolded, Charlotte noticed that Miss Vivian's maids were known for being perfunctory, but she hadn't expected them to be so careless in front of so many people. However, what truly surprised her was the unprofessional behavior of the boutique staff, especially considering it was a shop that catered specifically to nobles. The boutique staff appeared embarrassed, and Nevia, noticing the situation, asked if something was wrong. Charlotte, addressing the staff, questioned their conduct in front of a lady, asking if they were being disrespectful. The staff, visibly flustered, flinched and quickly apologized. Later, Charlotte expressed her concern to Nevia, wondering if it was truly all right to leave Miss Vivian in that state, as she seemed unwell. Nevia, recalling the scene, understood that Miss Vivian must have felt unworthy of the gifts. She believed Miss Vivian must be hurt and now saw her as the evil adopted sister. In Nevia's view, none of this would have happened if Duke Agnes Nikon had prepared gifts for Miss Vivian as well from the beginning. Nevia, calmly sipping her tea, reassured Charlotte that everything was all right and that she had her reasons for keeping the secret. She thought of Duke Agnes, an arrogant man who believed he had complete control over everything. His continued neglect not only affected Wood and Miss Vivian, but also fostered growing discontent among the servants. Ever since he adopted her, people had begun to question his judgment. Nevia knew that when this doubt finally challenged the Duke's pride, she would be blamed as the source of the Agnes family's downfall. Afterwards, Charlotte began counting the gifts, noting there were 15 boxes. She recalled that Miss Vivian usually received over 30. However, she chuckled, realizing that Anson was practically an exclusive store for nobles. The fact that Nevia received gifts from them meant that people now acknowledged her as a true lady. Charlotte, feeling proud, couldn't help but rejoice at this development. Excitedly, Charlotte urged Nevia to open the gifts, eager to see what was inside. Nevia, accepting her suggestion, began unwrapping the gifts. Though she knew these gifts were merely for show, she believed Duke Agnes thought she would be overjoyed with just any luxury items. As Charlotte admired the gifts, She marveled at their beauty and high quality. She picked up a dress, marveling at the design, and suggested Nevia try it on. However, Nevia remained unmoved, feeling as though she were taking something that should have belonged to Vivian. As she examined the gifts, Charlotte slowly realized that the designs and colors were more suited to Miss Vivian, appearing too childish and out of place for Nevia. She let out an awkward chuckle and offered to put the gifts away. Nevia agreed and left the room. While organizing the items, Charlotte noticed a piece of jewelry the steward had mentioned. Among all the gifts, only a single hairpin seemed appropriate. She decided to leave it on the table for Nevia and then left as well. Later, Charlotte returned to inform Nevia that they had marmalade that day. She suggested having it with toast and assured Nevia she would bring it discreetly, so as not to repeat yesterday's mishap. Nevia thanked her and agreed. Charlotte quickly left to fetch the food. Nevia contemplated her situation, feeling that Charlotte needn't be so considerate of her feelings. In 2 days, she would finally be leaving this mansion. She had made the contract with Edward and set the final decision for 5 days later, because of the Empress's invitation. Once Vivian's condition improved, Duke Nickon and Agnes would undoubtedly accept the invitation to divert attention from the engagement. That would be the perfect opportunity. While Nickon was away, she would take her out of the mansion and then escape to Isolde. As she considered her destination, Nevia realized that in none of her past lives had she ever encountered Duke Isolde. He was a man who had never obeyed the Emperor's orders and had mysteriously disappeared using magic at the age of 8, leaving no trace. Countless rumors surrounded the Duke of Isolde's mansion. Some said he was a brilliant mage hiding his unsightly appearance. Others insisted he was exceptionally handsome but mad. Some even whispered that he wasn't human, but a monster. Despite the various accounts, the true reason for his absence remained unclear. The most plausible explanation was his poor health. However, due to unknown forces and singularities continually posing threats, no one could control the declining land. Nevia recalled that it was Prince Clyde who had used Isolde's power and appeared. Was it at the royal ball during her 8th life? By then, she had already broken off her engagement with Prince Ares. Humiliating rumors about her had spread among the nobles, tarnishing her reputation. Taking advantage of her miserable situation, Parlaco constantly harassed and disrespected her. That night, her dress had been stained by a spilled drink, putting her in an embarrassing predicament. To escape the scrutinizing gazes of the nobles, she retreated to a secluded spot. However, even there, she wasn't alone. She encountered a man, icy blue eyes, an unreadable, emotionless expression, and an intimidating aura that sent shivers down her spine. It was the first and only time she had seen Prince Clyde up close. In her memory, Prince Clyde approached Nevia and asked if she was Miss Nevia Agnes. She curtsied and formally greeted him as Prince Clyde. However, he rejected the title, stating that he was no longer a prince since being entrusted to the Duke of Isolde's family. Nevia found his demeanor as rude as the rumors described. Without much explanation, he offered her his coat, insisting she take it, and then turned to leave. She hesitated, knowing that wearing his coat might spark unwanted rumors. Nevertheless, she accepted it, for that small act of kindness was the first she had ever received in her life. Nevia then pondered Clyde's eventual adoption by the Duke of Isolde's family. The exact timing was uncertain, but once it happened, the position of Isolde's adopted child would be returned to its rightful owner, and she would have to leave. That would be the moment she truly gained her freedom. Until then, she had to survive at all costs. Just then, the panicked screams of the maids interrupted her thoughts. They cried for help, urging someone to come quickly. Miss Vivian had fainted. Observing the situation, Nevia realized Vivian was seriously hurt, and in that moment she understood. Just like Philippa, those who saw her as an unwelcome presence would not hesitate to trample her as they pleased. Nevia picked up the hairpin box and headed towards Vivian's room, determined to turn the threat into an opportunity. Meanwhile, Duke Nick and Agnes rushed to Vivian's side, worried sick, and found her lying unconscious on the bed, his expression clearly distressed. The doctor explained that Vivian's condition was due to excessive psychological stress and emphasized the need to stabilize her mental health. Nickon felt frustrated, wondering if Vivian had collapsed out of jealousy over Nevia receiving gifts. He considered it childish behavior and worried that such family conflicts would damage Nevia's reputation, especially with her upcoming marriage to the prince. Duke Nickon exclaimed in frustration, wondering why there was never peace in his house, and scolded the maids and servants for not taking proper care of Vivian. Maggie and the others hastily apologized, but Duke Nicken remained displeased. Maggie trembled with fear, realizing she would be in serious trouble if blamed. To protect herself, she twisted the truth and incriminated Nevia. She told Duke Nicken that the servants were powerless in the situation and placed the responsibility on Nevia. She lied, claiming Nevia had deliberately left her door open to flaunt her gifts, hurting Vivian's feelings. She further claimed that Nevia had previously provoked Vivian by mentioning playing in the water with the young master, which deeply upset Vivian. Already agitated, Duke Nicken became suspicious of Nevia after hearing Maggie's accusations. Duke Nicken hesitated as he considered Maggie's accusations. He knew that if it were any other child, he might have believed it, but Nevia had always been obedient, and it seemed illogical for her to deliberately provoke Vivian. He began to suspect Maggie, wondering if she was the one deceiving him. Just then, Nevia arrived with a gift box, calmly asking if something was wrong. She added that she had something to say. Maggie flinched nervously, afraid that Nevia would expose something. However, she quickly noticed the box in Nevia's hand and smirked, seizing the opportunity to manipulate the situation. Feigning innocence, she pointed out that the box looked like it was from Ancio Boutique. Fully aware of Maggie's ploy, Nevia decided to play along. She feigned hesitation and nervousness. Maggie continued her deception, implying that Nevia had only brought the box after hearing about Vivian. She sarcastically asked if Nevia intended to share her gifts. To appease Vivian, Nevia continued her act, vaguely referring to it as a hand-me-down, leaving room for interpretation. As Nevia stood there, Philippa stormed in, fuming. She demanded an explanation, asking what Nevia meant by calling a gift for Miss Vivian a hand-me-down. Already harboring resentment towards Nevia, Philippa saw this as a perfect opportunity to escalate the situation. She inwardly rejoiced, convinced that Nevia would be utterly ruined after this. Nevia hesitated, then called out to her nanny. But Philippa dramatically feigned offense, exclaiming how shocking and disrespectful it was for Nevia to mock Vivian, who had noble blood. Nevia tried to clarify, but Philippa refused to listen, smirking inwardly as she noticed Duke Nicken's growing suspicion towards Nevia. His passive stance emboldened her. Determined to teach Nevia a lesson, Philippa demanded to see what Nevia had brought for Vivian and roughly grabbed Nevia's hand before she could answer. The box fell to the ground, scattering the hairpin inside. Philippa gasped dramatically, feigning surprise, and used this moment to further deceive Duke Nicken. She berated Nevia, exclaiming in disbelief that after receiving so many lavish gifts, Nevia would offer something so plain. Nevia's face fell, filled with sadness and frustration, as the situation turned increasingly against her. Philippa smirked inwardly, satisfied that Nevia's cheap hairpin had exposed her greed. Meanwhile, Maggie eagerly joined in, further mocking Nevia. She scoffed at the hairpin, saying it looked like something meant for a servant, not befitting Miss Vivian. She even compared it to Vivian's worst hair accessory, emphasizing that even the lowest quality item in her collection was far superior. Maggie questioned why anyone would choose such a thing as a gift, adding insult to injury. But Nevia remained calm, thinking, do they really need to bully an 8-year-old girl like this? They deserve to be reprimanded. With calculated grace, Nevia deliberately displayed her manners in front of Duke Nicken. She bent down gracefully and picked up the hairpin, a gesture that didn't escape his notice. Then she made her move, looking up at Duke Nicken and speaking in an innocent tone. Father, this hairpin is all I need. Both Philippa and Maggie were stunned, completely caught off guard, their faces contorted in shock. What? Nevia continued her act of meekness. Is this too greedy of me? Duke Nicken stared dumbfounded. Just moments ago, Nevia had seemed like a trapped prisoner, but now she had cleverly turned the tables. His mind raced. Had this been her plan all along? If so, it was brilliant. Nevia found it absurd that they were so critical of an ordinary boutique accessory, especially when their target was an 8-year-old girl. She realized the true reason behind this treatment was her background, because someone of her status had received too many gifts. Yet, she reminded herself that this wasn't the time for sentimentality, not while Duke Nicken still harbored suspicions. Maintaining her composure, she spoke humbly, offering a sincere apology if her actions had appeared greedy. She insisted that she had simply been overjoyed to receive a gift from her father. Inwardly, she fought back a smile at their foolishness, but she reminded herself to stay focused, feigning fragility. Clutching the hairpin tightly, her voice trembled as if on the verge of tears. She assured them that she desired nothing more than this single item and wouldn't ask for anything else. Nevia let a tear slip down her cheek, whispering that from now on, she wouldn't ask for a single thing. Watching her cry, an unexpected emotion stirred within Duke Nicken. He realized the brainwashing hadn't affected her, and as someone well-versed in the politics and deceptions of nobility, he should have been able to see through the facade of an 8-year-old. However, it wasn't the petty squabble that truly captured his attention, but the impeccable etiquette she displayed. Her composed demeanor was so flawless. Anyone who saw her would instantly recognize her noble bearing. In that moment, he reaffirmed that bringing Nevia into the Agnes family had not been a mistake. He spoke to her firmly, reminding her that she was a princess of Agnes, which meant she had the right to expect more. Yet, inwardly, Nevia questioned his judgment. If she truly were a princess of Agnes, why had he just doubted her? Had he already forgotten the mockery and disdain she had endured? She feigned hesitation, stammering that it was all her fault, but Duke Nicken brushed her words aside, declaring it was time to investigate and determine who was truly responsible for the current situation. His sharp gaze then shifted to Philippa, indicating his intention to get to the bottom of this. Panic seized Philippa. She realized Duke Nicken was being deceived by Nevia. Desperate to turn the tables, she tried to convince him that Nevia was merely putting on an act, feigning innocence to escape punishment. She insisted that if he had witnessed what Nevia had done to her, he wouldn't be so easily fooled. However, Duke Nicken immediately challenged her, demanding to know what she meant. Realizing her slip-up, Philippa floundered, cursing her own careless words. As Duke Nicken pressed further, ordering her to speak rather than remain silent, she hesitated, growing increasingly anxious. She knew that although all evidence of her embezzlement had been destroyed, if Nevia were to bring it up now, she would be in serious trouble. Nervously, she attempted to downplay the situation, admitting there had been some friction, but only because she hadn't taken proper care of Nevia. Duke Nicken sternly questioned Philippa, demanding to know how she could shift the blame onto Nevia. Flustered, Philippa quickly apologized, admitting she had misspoken. However, Duke Nicken remained unconvinced. He drew his sword, stating that his past trust in Philippa had allowed Emir made the audacity to deceive Nevia. The sight of the sword sent Maggie into a state of sheer terror. She collapsed, trembling on her knees, desperately pleading her case, insisting it was all a misunderstanding. Grasping the gravity of the situation, Philippa, too, became consumed by fear, hastily admitting she had misjudged Nevia and begging for forgiveness. Inwardly, she dreaded the inevitable surfacing of the kitchen's embezzlement ledger. She knew that once that ledger came to light, she would be ruined. Maggie, on the verge of breaking down, pleaded for Duke Nicken's mercy, but he remained unmoved, his expression grim as he raised his sword, ready to punish her insolence. However, before he could swing, a faint voice interrupted him. Vivian had regained consciousness. Hearing his daughter's voice, Duke Nicken immediately paused, his attention shifting to Vivian. Vivian yawned, confused by the commotion in the room. Duke Nicken rushed to her side with concern, asking if she was all right. But when Vivian noticed the sword in his hand, fear gripped her as she realized what he was about to do. Tears streaming down her face, she pleaded with him not to kill Maggie and Philippa. Seeing her distress, Duke Nicken's heart softened. He sheathed his sword and moved to comfort Vivian, gently assuring her that he wouldn't harm them. He urged her to stop crying, reminding her that becoming too emotional might cause her to faint again. Witnessing this, Nevia silently noted that despite everything, Duke Nicken was indeed a loving father. Duke Nicken assured Nevia that the gifts he had given her were hers to keep and that she needn't return them. In response, Nevia curtsied gracefully, expressing her gratitude. Satisfied, Duke Nicken instructed her to return to her room, and she obediently complied. He turned to Maggie and Philippa, sternly informing them that they owed their reprieve entirely to Vivian's plea. Philippa, trembling with fear, hastily expressed her gratitude for his mercy. Duke Nicken then addressed Vivian, making it clear that as a member of the Agnes family, her jealousy of Nevia's gifts was unacceptable. When Vivian hesitantly protested, he soothed her, promising to buy her even finer things. Overjoyed by this, Vivian's tears instantly turned to smiles, and she happily agreed. Pleased with her reaction, Duke Nicken praised her for being a good girl. With this matter settled, he turned to Lyndon, instructing him to prepare their luggage as he intended to depart for the capital immediately. Lyndon accepted the order without hesitation. Duke Nicken then contemplated their political strategy, considering reducing the funds allocated to lobbying the queen. He had initially planned to postpone the engagement until Nevia's etiquette was fully polished while continuing to appease the queen with magic stones. However, Nevia's performance today had far exceeded his expectations. He had anticipated at least another year before arranging a meeting, but given her progress, he decided to request a personal discussion before proceeding with the engagement. With Vivian now calmed, he briefly reflected on Wood's recent silence, unsure if yesterday's warning had truly been effective. Regardless, he felt it best to remain cautious. Before leaving, Duke Nicken instructed Lyndon to ensure Wood made no rash moves during his absence, ordering a squad of guards to watch him. Lyndon immediately obeyed. As Nevia walked towards her room, fatigue weighed heavily upon her, making her feel as though she had been traversing an endless battlefield. She urged herself to persevere just a little longer. A mysterious power, capable of stealing others' abilities, flashed through her mind, a symbol of her ninth and final life. She couldn't help but wonder if this could even be considered living. She reflected on her struggles. Her seemingly insignificant spoils of war had been both her shield and her weapon, protecting her from those who sought to harm her. But the battle was far from over. She still needed to remain vigilant. She forced herself to dismiss any thoughts of weakness, reminding herself that she had to be colder, more ruthless. Yet, her heart felt weary. The thorn she had meticulously cultivated for survival now pricked her, leaving her wondering if she was truly all right. Having lived the same life 9 times, she feared something within her had finally shattered. However, she couldn't stop. Nevia steeled her resolve, adjusted her hairpin, and forced a smile to comfort herself. She reminded herself that there was no time for sentimentality. She was still safe. However, the moment she stepped into her room, shock gripped her. Charlotte lay unconscious on the floor. Wood stood there arrogantly, his voice laced with sarcasm as he asked why she had taken so long to return. A cruel smile twisted his lips as he ordered his men, hit her. Before Nevia could react, a heavy blow struck the back of her head. She collapsed unconscious. Wood cursed in frustration at the unexpected presence of Nevia's maid. He angrily ordered his men to lock Charlotte in an abandoned room. Simultaneously, he instructed another to follow him as he had Nevia dragged to an open-air warehouse. Rage seethed within Wood, determined to teach her a lesson in a hidden corner where his father wouldn't notice, a place he had painstakingly found just yesterday. He was convinced that within half a day, she would be on her knees, begging for mercy. One of Wood's men hesitated, uncertain if this would be discovered, but Wood confidently reassured him, saying he only needed to throw Nevia from the balcony. With his magic, it would be as easy as turning his hand. He ordered his men to wait below, and they quickly obeyed. Wood cast his magic, carefully lowering Nevia down, reminding himself that he couldn't let her get hurt yet. Once she was safely on the ground, his men carried her into an abandoned storage room, and Wood ordered them to lock her inside. Wood grinned, contemplating whether to wake Nevia so he could unleash his pent-up resentment on her. He had finally found this place where his father wouldn't notice, and he intended to make the most of it. However, before he could act, one of his men rushed in, panicked, reporting that his father had sent a knight to watch him. They had initially tried to stall by claiming he was strolling in the garden, but the situation wasn't looking good. Wood angrily questioned why his father had suddenly taken an interest in him. The man replied that it was likely because the Duke was preparing to depart for the capital. Wood pondered this for a moment and realized the situation might actually work to his advantage. With his father gone, he would have more freedom to act. He decided to deal with the knight first and ordered his men to withdraw for now, ensuring the warehouse was securely locked. Meanwhile, Philippa trembled in disbelief. She couldn't accept that years of loyalty had resulted in her master's callous abandonment. Her shock quickly turned to anger towards Nevia, placing all the blame on her. She firmly believed that once Nevia's influence was removed, everything would return to normal. As Philippa anxiously waited, a man approached her, informing her that the item she requested had arrived. Her eyes widened with anticipation, realizing the notebook was finally in her hands. Impatient from the earlier delay, she snatched it, a triumphant smile spreading across her face, a sense of satisfaction filling her. Her plan was set. She would fill all the blank spaces with Charlotte's name and then, precisely as described in the notebook, hide the stolen jewels in Charlotte's room. This way, she could not only frame Charlotte for embezzlement, but also eliminate her and even that troublesome cook without lifting a finger. Once everything was in place, she hurried to report the matter to Duke Nicken. However, upon arriving at his office, she was surprised to find Lyndon, the steward, there. Lyndon informed her that the Duke had already left for the capital, leaving Philippa momentarily stunned. She realized this was a crucial moment. With the Duke away, Lyndon would handle all household affairs. The question was, how much authority did he possess? If he could punish those guilty of embezzlement, her plan might still work. Regaining her composure, she confidently fabricated a story, reminding Lyndon of her previously mentioned dispute with Miss Nevia. When Lyndon acknowledged the incident, she handed him the notebook, pretending it was the source of their quarrel. Intrigued, Lyndon began flipping through the pages, carefully examining its contents. As he read further, his expression suddenly changed, and he gasped. Lyndon was taken aback as he pieced together Philippa's claims, shocked that the cook could possibly be colluding with the guild to establish secret funds. Philippa quickly confirmed this, emphasizing that the ledger documented all of his wrongdoings. She then accused Charlotte of being his accomplice, even suggesting that Miss Nevia had attempted to intervene and shift the blame onto her. Lyndon hesitated, lost in thought, while Philippa told herself that regardless of whether this would lead to Nevia's punishment, what truly mattered was public perception. If she could tarnish Nevia's image, she could use this opportunity to restore her own reputation. She further urged Lyndon to take immediate action. Soon, the guards brought in the cook, bound and struggling. He protested, demanding an explanation, but Lyndon sternly informed him that he had been reported for embezzlement. A guard then presented a box filled with jewels, stating they were found in the cook's room, adding that similar valuables were discovered in Charlotte's quarters. Lyndon was furious at such audacity and demanded to know Charlotte's whereabouts. However, the guards admitted that despite searching the entire mansion, they had been unable to find her. This unsettled Philippa. Charlotte shouldn't have been able to escape so quickly. If they couldn't pin the theft on her, suspicions would only grow. Determined to frame Charlotte, Philippa insisted she must have fled, realizing the truth was about to be exposed. She urged Lyndon to act swiftly and find her. Lyndon hesitated, realizing Charlotte had been at the center of controversy for 2 consecutive days. Given the gravity of the current situation, he knew he had to apprehend her before the Duke returned. If he had to report that a maid had escaped due to embezzlement, he could already imagine candelabras flying at his head. To avoid such a fate, he immediately ordered the guards to intensify their search. Late that night, the guards returned, carrying an unconscious Charlotte on their backs. They reported finding her locked inside an abandoned room. And strangely, the exterior had also been sealed. Lyndon was shocked, realizing someone had deliberately knocked her unconscious and trapped her there. Seeing her scheme unraveling, Philippa began to panic, but quickly tried to turn the situation to her advantage. She suggested the cook might have done it, fearing exposure. However, Lyndon found the entire situation increasingly bizarre. What should have been a straightforward embezzlement investigation had taken an unexpectedly awkward turn. A guard hesitated, then informed Lyndon that Miss Nevia hadn't been seen for some time. Shortly after, Duke Nicken returned, clearly distraught. He demanded to know how the situation had escalated to this point. The true culprit of the embezzlement remained unclear. Nevia was now missing, and her maid had been found unconscious in an abandoned room. He slammed his fist on the table, roaring that this was clearly a kidnapping. Returning from a brief meeting with the Empress, only to be met with this mess, he was furious. Duke Nicken ordered Lyndon to find Nevia immediately, declaring that the entire capital must be searched if necessary. Meanwhile, in a dark and abandoned warehouse, Nevia slowly regained consciousness. Seeing nothing in the pitch-black room, she immediately realized what had disregarded Duke Nicken's warning. Remaining calm, she assessed the situation. She wasn't tied up, her mouth wasn't gagged, and she wasn't injured. If Wood's intention was merely to kidnap and imprison her, this arrangement seemed carelessly executed. She realized with chilling clarity that he had intended to torture her in this secluded location, but had been interrupted. Either he wasn't in a hurry, or some urgent matter had forced him to leave. Knowing she couldn't passively await his return, she began to consider her next move. Even a sliver of light would allow her to better assess her surroundings. She wondered if it was already night. Nevia realized she was trapped in an old, musty warehouse filled with wooden crates. The location had likely been chosen for its isolation. Fearing there might be guards outside, she nonetheless decided to investigate further. Believing there was a solution to every predicament, she took heart in the bird song that heralded the arrival of morning. Hunger gnawed at her. She hadn't eaten since the previous day, and the cold exacerbated her condition. Determined not to give up, she searched the room and discovered a locked, dilapidated door. Despite her best efforts, it wouldn't budge. Exhausted, she sat down despondent. She knew she had to escape before Wood returned. Then, she noticed a damp patch on the floor and recalled the recent rain, growing suspicious of the strange leak. Moving some crates, she discovered a small hole, likely used by animals. Believing she might be able to squeeze through, she decided to try, as it might be her only chance. While chaos reigned in the Duke's mansion, Wood stealthily approached the warehouse, relieved his father hadn't yet discovered Nevia's whereabouts. He planned to threaten her into silence, ensuring she wouldn't reveal he was her captor. But upon arrival, he was shocked to see Nevia, crawling out of a small dog hole in the warehouse. He could scarcely believe his eyes, and in disbelief, yelled for his men to seize her. Nevia immediately bolted, running with all her might. One of Wood's men managed to grab her, but she quickly pulled a hairpin from her hair and stabbed him in the groin, breaking free. As the man doubled over in pain, Wood cursed his incompetence. Wasting no time, Wood gave chase himself. Before she could escape, he trapped her with his water magic. Nevia, terrified but defiant, struggled against it. Seizing her, Wood taunted her, boasting of his true power far beyond her comprehension. He mocked her for thinking she could win with her haphazardly stolen magic. As she trembled in his grasp, he tightened his grip on her throat, declaring someone like her wasn't even worthy of being his opponent. Despite the agonizing pain, Nevia reached up and clutched his hand, refusing to surrender. Just when all seemed lost, something strange happened. Nevia suddenly noticed the wind had stopped. Not that time had completely stopped, but everything felt slower. In the profound stillness, she found herself staring into Wood's eyes filled with disgust and contempt. So close, perhaps for the first time. And in that moment, Nevia unexpectedly broke free from Wood's hold, a confident smile spreading across her face. She realized something incredible. She had the ability to steal her opponent's magic through touch. It wasn't magic she inherently possessed, but something beyond the norm. An ability she could trigger through contact. Wood stared, stunned, unable to comprehend what had happened. Nevia pushed his magic to its limit, heralding a magical explosion. She detonated the full force of Wood's power, and he stumbled back in terror, begging her to stop. She recalled the original story, mentioning that such an explosion would severely damage the body and cause the caster to cough up blood. But strangely, nothing of the sort happened. The power she wielded was extraordinary, the power of the Black Moon, a force that existed outside the conventional laws of magic. Sparks of electricity began to surge around Nevia, and she fixed Wood with a burning gaze. She warned him that he should have run while he had the chance. Then, using Wood's own water magic against him, she unleashed a massive explosion that reverberated through the area. Meanwhile, back at the Duke's mansion, Duke Nicken's frustration grew. He inquired about Nevia's whereabouts, only to be informed by a maid that she was still missing. Exhausted and stressed, Duke Nicken sighed deeply. Puzzled by the unresolved situation, Duke Nicken pondered. Things were dire, yes, but never this disastrous. If this continued, the important ceremony planned for the following day might have to be canceled due to Nevia's absence. And if that happened, the cost and consequences would be severe, not to mention finding another adopted daughter who looked exactly like her was a near impossible task. Just then, a deafening explosion rocked Nickon. He rushed to the window, startled, and peered out. In the distance, a massive magical storm raged, making his eyes widen. He struggled to comprehend it, wondering if it was a typhoon, but quickly dismissed the thought. They were far from the sea, yet the magical signature felt eerily familiar. Then it struck him. It was similar to Wood's magic, but Wood didn't possess that kind of overwhelming power. Still, the resemblance was too stark to ignore. A worried Nickon immediately raced towards the source of the magic, calling out Wood's name. When he arrived at the scene, he was met with a heavy silence. Lingering magic hung in the air, thick as fog on a pond, evidence of a powerful magical explosion. It was widespread, and with that level of magic, it was clear that any creature caught in it could have been drained of its life force. Then he spotted Wood collapsed on the ground. Nickon ran towards him in a panic. Wood was coughing up blood, showing signs of internal injuries, but at least his body was still warm and he was breathing. A servant soon reported that Miss Nevia had also been found nearby. Nickon gritted his teeth, his suspicions confirmed. Wood had clearly pushed Nevia too far, resulting in this disaster. But despite this, his primary concern remained Wood's condition. In his eyes, Nevia was merely an asset. Even if Wood had killed her, she could always be replaced. Wasting no further time, Nickon ordered his men to quickly take Wood to a physician. When asked about Nevia's condition, a guard reported that while she had no serious injuries or broken bones, she had fainted. Nickon then instructed them to take Nevia to the infirmary first, with explicit orders to move swiftly. After confirming that Nevia hadn't sustained any serious injuries, Nickon breathed a sigh of relief. However, he quickly began to worry about the upcoming welcoming ceremony. Even if he used this incident as an excuse, rumors about a typhoon would spread. The queen would likely use the opportunity of an investigation to summon him and create trouble. Realizing he needed a scapegoat, his thoughts were interrupted when he noticed Nevia's hairpin lying on the ground, stained with blood. Although Nevia only had minor cuts and bruises, the blood on the hairpin puzzled him. Just then, a guard informed him that they had found Wood's servant, who looked terrified and was desperately muttering pleas for forgiveness. Annoyed by Wood's recklessness, Nickon quickly devised a plan to protect him, suspecting Wood had brought the servant along to kidnap Nevia. As the guards moved to seize the servant, the man frantically tried to explain his innocence, insisting it was young Master Wood. However, Nickon slapped him silent and accused him of deceiving Wood to cover up Wood's crimes. Nickon fabricated a story, claiming an arrogant servant had kidnapped Nevia and held her hostage, while Wood had bravely uncovered the truth and saved his sister. He didn't hesitate to order the servant's imprisonment, declaring that such an act couldn't have been done alone and there must be accomplices. With several outstanding matters, including the cook's embezzlement and Charlotte's involvement, Nickon decided to report the news to the royal family first. Locked in her room, Charlotte was lost in thoughts of a life she'd once dreamed of, running a small cafe, living a peaceful existence, making fruit preserves, and serving coffee and scones. She'd imagined saving enough money to repay the debt that bound her to the Duke's mansion and finally gaining her freedom. Yet, she knew that no matter how much a maid earned, leaving this place was nearly impossible. Many had tried to secretly save money, but now she faced false accusations of embezzlement, despite having done nothing wrong. Her thoughts were interrupted by a group of maids and servants who burst into her room in a panic. One of them desperately asked what they should do, fearing that all the servants associated with her would eventually fall into Philippa's clutches. Charlotte looked at them, realizing these were the very people who had helped her expose Philippa's truth. They had been swindled out of a significant amount of money by the nanny, yet now they found themselves in this miserable situation. As she observed their distress, she couldn't help but acknowledge that Miss Nevia controlled them all like playthings. Charlotte encouraged the panicked maids and servants, telling them not to worry, calling the current situation an opportunity. When they questioned her, she explained that the head chef would likely betray Philippa and expose their past embezzlement, as the two had been involved together. Although Charlotte shouldn't have reported Philippa without Miss Nevia's permission, she felt she had no other choice. She instructed the others to find the currently imprisoned head chef and tell him that Philippa had sold him out, knowing that with his pride, he wouldn't take the blame alone and would likely expose Philippa's secrets. Meanwhile, in Niken's office, Lyndon, the butler, reported that the investigation confirmed Philippa and the head chef's embezzlement, but Charlotte and her department weren't involved in the falsified accounts. Niken was surprised that the maid in charge of Nevia's care was innocent, but remained skeptical. However, he decided to drop the matter, believing it wasn't worth wasting resources on a mere maid. Niken instructed Lyndon to inform the royal family that the heir celebration would be postponed due to the threat of the magical explosion. Just then, a group of maids and servants entered his office, stating their desire to report Philippa's wrongdoings. After hearing their testimonies, Niken confirmed that Philippa and the head chef had conspired to embezzle from the beginning. Despite Philippa's outward appearance of loyalty, Niken felt no need to keep someone with unclear intentions around. He decided to transfer Charlotte to the laundry and assign a new maid to Nevia. Afterward, Niken went to Wood's room, where a doctor was examining the unconscious boy. Niken inquired about his condition, and the doctor informed him that while there were no serious physical injuries, Wood's magical state was concerning and required a highly skilled mage to address. After the doctor left, Niken sat beside Wood, his expression grim. He thought that this must be the aftermath of the magical explosion. Although Wood survived, if his magic was reversed, it could mean the end of his career as a mage. Niken's heart was filled with worry and confusion, silently wondering why Wood would take such a risk. Did he truly hate Nevia that much? After the incident, Niken began to question whether bringing Nevia back was the right decision. He thought it wouldn't be difficult to cover up a child's death through illness or accident, but he couldn't ignore her striking appearance. Bright silver hair, flawless white skin, and red eyes that made her look almost perfect. He believed that in 10 years, she would blossom into a stunning beauty, and according to secret sources, her appearance matched Prince Eris's preferences. Losing her now would be a waste. Just then, Wood regained consciousness. Seeing him awake, Niken rushed to his side, asking if he was all right and if he felt any pain. He reminded Wood that he had experienced a magical explosion and was lucky to be alive. Niken then asked about the whirlwind, but Wood appeared confused, unable to recall clearly. As he tried to remember, fragments of what happened in the forest began to surface. He had seen Nevia running away, but the memory became hazy. Wood stammered in terror that he couldn't remember. Niken asked again, shocked, but Wood only trembled harder, recalling terrifying blue sparks and the presence of something red. At that moment, fear overwhelmed him. He screamed in panic, breaking down in tears, blaming everything on Nevia. Deeply worried, Niken tried to calm him down, assuring him not to worry and promising to do anything for him. Afterward, Niken, heavy-hearted, inquired about Nevia. Lyndon informed him that she was still asleep. Niken sighed, lost in thought. If Nevia could be engaged to the crown prince, the Agnes family could maintain their power over the empire for the next 100 years. His mind made up, he instructed Lyndon to prepare for a visit to the royal palace. However, Lyndon mentioned that Lord Spencer was eager to see him. At first, Niken tried to postpone the meeting, citing his busy schedule, but upon hearing it was important, he agreed to the meeting. When Niken met with Edward Spencer, Edward revealed he had discovered a way to cure magical reflux disorder, much to Niken's astonishment. Edward confirmed it was true, as he had been treating his own sister. Filled with hope, Niken immediately pleaded with Edward to save his daughter, Vivian. Edward then began the treatment, explaining that he would extract the refluxing magic from Vivian and reinfuse it in a way that would allow it to circulate correctly, preventing an explosion. He first stabilized her with his own magic. The procedure was a success, and Vivian felt better almost immediately. Overcome with relief and joy, Niken embraced her tightly. When Vivian asked if she was completely healed, Niken happily told her yes. She was now perfectly healthy.